Capitalism, it's defined as an economic system based on the private ownership of the means of production and their operation for profit. But a funny thing is happening to big for-profit publicly traded companies. Increasingly, they're practicing capitalism with a conscience. In this edition of the Commerce Code podcast, Commerce with a Conscience. I'm Silvio Tavares here in San Francisco on March 5th. This is Commerce Code, brought to you by DCA, the Digital Commerce Alliance. It's great to be with you. 2020 was definitely a landmark year if you evaluate things purely on the basis of chaos. A pandemic rolled across the world, trade and travel ground to a standstill, and riots and social upheaval swept across the globe. Big public corporations, normally silent on social issues, departed from their traditional stance and delved deeply into social issues, including racial equity, wealth inequality, and preserving the environment, among other things. So the thing is, aren't big capitalist corporations supposed to be focused on one main thing? And that main thing is delivering profits to shareholders. But 2021 has seen commerce and capitalism experiencing a landmark moment. This moment has been building for some time. It's the advent of a kinder, gentler corporation, still focused on profit, yes, but increasingly focused on how that profit is delivered. Is it delivered in a way that's consistent with certain social values, including racial equity, gender equity, and just plain equity in general? In short, big publicly traded companies are not just practicing commerce, they're practicing commerce with a conscience. Today on the show, we examine three key trends by discussing them through the lens of DCA member companies that have been practicing commerce with a conscience. Joining me on the show today is the Commerce Code podcast producer, Rebecca Donahue. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning, Silvio. How are you?
I'm doing great, and thanks for being on the show with me today.
Glad to be back. And today we're discussing a great topic, commerce with a conscience. And, we have many DCA member companies that have been very active in this area. What would you say are the top three trends in this movement around commerce with a conscience?
There are three. Number one's got to be racial justice. Number two, I would definitely say, is equity for women in the workplace. And number three is probably the one that we've seen the most written about, and that is environmental justice. Now, in the area of racial justice, much of what has created this increase in corporate activism was really the outrage over continued unjustified police killings of Black Americans, especially in the U.S. Many DCA member companies made strong statements against this kind of violence, and they even made broad commitments to going forward support racial justice. A really great example of this is Microsoft, a DCA member company. Their CEO, Satya Nadella, has pledged that they're going to double the number of Black and African-American owned approved suppliers over the next 3 years. And then they're going to spend an incremental $500 million with those existing and new suppliers. Microsoft has also pledged to double the number of Black and African-American managers, senior individual contributors, and senior leaders in the United States by 2025. Bank of America is another big DCA member. This past week, they announced that as part of their $1 billion four-year commitment to advance racial equity and economic opportunity, they've directed more than $22 million in philanthropic funding to support education, jobs, entrepreneurship, health, and housing for people in communities of color. More generally speaking, just stepping back, big U.S. companies are giving a much more detailed picture of diversity in their ranks, with dozens of publicly quoted companies sharing gender and race breakdowns. And many of them are doing it for the first time this year. Just this week, the Wall Street Journal studied the S&P 500, and they found that 3/4 of the S&P 500 companies they sampled disclosed some information on racial and ethnic diversity in their employee base in their 2020 annual report. So overall, it's pretty clear that companies feel that now is the time to provide increased transparency as it relates to racial diversity. And many feel that now is the time to act, including making significant financial commitments to promoting diversity. It's fair to say also that these actions, they're not entirely like altruistic. Many of these moves are fueled by a feeling that regulators, that investors, and most importantly, customers are watching, and they expect companies to make more progress on racial issues.
Well, Silvio, as a woman, I'm really pleased to hear that there's also some movement in the area of equity for women in the workplace. This seems to be an important part of the movement for commerce with a conscience. Which companies would you call out in a positive way in this category?
I think this is an area that's really taken on increased prominence and also urgency over the past year. And that's because of the pandemic. Many professional women, they've been disproportionately bearing the brunt of negative career impacts due to increased childcare responsibilities, among other new challenges. And so this has really exacerbated long-standing inequities for women in the workplace. But here too, just as you point out, Rebecca, we see big companies stepping up to address these challenges in a very public way. For example, MasterCard, a DCA member company, recently announced that they had achieved pay parity for women employees. In other words, at MasterCard, every woman gets paid the same amount as what her male colleague doing the same job would get. Historically, this has been one of the biggest challenges for women in the workplace, ensuring that they get equal pay. And here we see MasterCard announcing very publicly that they have achieved it. Hilton Hotels, this is one of the largest hospitality groups in the world, and they're also a DCA member company. They've consistently been rated as one of the 20 best places for women to work. And they actually host a conference every single year for all of their women employees to discuss and address issues of particular importance to women workers. And then more recently, NASDAQ, which is the second largest stock exchange in the world, and it's actually the stock exchange where many of the DCA member companies list their shares because we have a preponderance of tech companies. They petitioned the Securities and Exchange Commission to require that all companies listing shares or doing IPOs have at least one woman on the board of directors. And if they don't have a woman director, the company would be required to explain why they don't have one. So here too, we see that companies are moving decisively and publicly to declare themselves as supporting women in the workplace.
Now let's take a look at preserving the environment. Silvio, wouldn't you say that this has become a key area of focus for companies in the commerce with a conscience category?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is going to continue to be a focus. Many companies recognize that carbon emissions and really other ways that companies pollute the environment, that they're just not sustainable. Many of the companies in DCA, and I think generally in the corporate world, believe that the past practices that they have used serve to increase climate change, and that in turn leads to increased natural disasters. And look, some companies that are more reactive, they focus on providing help to victims of natural disasters, like what we've been seeing over the last several weeks in Texas. But other companies are taking a much more proactive and long-term approach to protecting the environment. One of these companies is a DCA member company, TransUnion, and one of their mottos is information for good. So they really focus on how can they do their business in a way that's good. So much so that in 2019, they actually hired a chief sustainability officer charged with managing all aspects of the business operations of TransUnion to reduce waste, to eliminate unnecessary carbon emissions, to implement renewable power sources for all those power-hungry data centers that TransUnion runs. Microsoft, they're another one that we mentioned earlier. They've also been quite active and vocal in this space. Microsoft has been carbon neutral across the world since all the way back in 2012. And they are publicly committing to being carbon negative by 2030. It means actually they're going to be a driver of reducing carbon emissions even less than they use, but actually reducing it for other companies. So this is a really significant area of change for big corporations. And we actually see this trend accelerating in 2021.
Absolutely. And based on what we've covered today, it certainly seems that there is a profound and significant change in how corporations see their role. And we have seen and will continue to see developments in racial justice, equity for women in the workplace, and also preserving the environment.
I do agree. And at DCA, we're going to continue to promote and monitor these trends in the industry. Rebecca, thanks for being with me on the show today.
It was great to be with you.
Coming right up, some closing thoughts on commerce with a conscience. As we discussed on the show today, commerce with a conscience is becoming ingrained in the way companies do business. Increasingly, it's being seen as a key competitive differentiator. It's going to be one of the enduring mega trends of 2021. And in many ways, that's a good thing. And get this, commerce with a conscience may prove to be the next big driver of increased corporate profitability, in much the same way that the internet was a big driver of increased corporate profitability 2 decades ago. And that's because as human beings and as commerce participants, we all inherently want to be a part of something that makes the world a better place. So if you want to learn more about the key new trends in digital commerce and commerce with a conscience, register now for DCA's next online forum and one-on-one company meetups. DCA's conference entitled Commerce Reinvented is on April 13th via Zoom. Register now at digcomall.org/online-forums/. That's digcomall.org/online-forums/. See you there. Everyone's going to be there. MasterCard, Discover, Rakuten, FIS, Microsoft, everybody. In fact, most of the companies we mentioned on the show today. So you should register now before all the seats are gone. For the Digital Commerce Alliance, take care of yourself and take care of each other. God bless you. This is Silvio Tavares signing off.